Welcome everyone to the final week of MCN 2021. We've had four wonderful session-packed and learnings-packed weeks in October, and we took a little break, and now here we are in November, ready to go for our last 2 days. We're in the home stretch here, so thank you and welcome everybody back to this great time that we're about to have. Today is Big Ideas Day. It's we've had kind of tracks before, and now we're going to explore some big ideas that are being shared in our community, and we're looking forward to that. We've got a lot of great sessions. I'll recap in a minute. And tomorrow we are actually having a recap session using open space as well, discussions, and a closing keynote, and then a send off for the conference. So we look forward to seeing all of you back here as well. Right after this opening welcome, we're going to have a keynote at 12:15 Eastern time with Porchia Moore and Nikhil. And they're going to talk about digital and civil rights movement and kind of how to advance equity within the digital work that we're doing here now. And then at 1:15 Eastern time, we've got three sessions looking at some pretty big ideas: the mythology of museums. There's kind of some big gnarly questions happening in there. Also a session on sharing a collections management system, not just sharing the data, but actually the system itself, a kind of unique thing in our world. And then another session that we're doing is It's Not a Companion. And they're talking about one story and multiple or two exhibits, the idea of balancing between in-person exhibits and online exhibits, how they each have their own place in what we do. And then at 2:15, we have got three more sessions that are going to be wonderful: digital collections as a product, kind of online collections, the future, kind of what are a user-focused kind of perspective on that. And then an interesting theatrical piece on lost jobs and found voices, kind of realizing we've got a very unique setting that we have now in the world of COVID. And what does that all mean for us? And is there a way to really capture what's been happening and what is happening? And then the third session at 2:15 that we have is a video showcase critique, again, focusing on some of the unique challenges that we've had during the pandemic times, the innovations that have happened, and so how that affects our creative world there. And then at 3:15, we're going to come back here and have a recap and reflect on the sessions of what we've learned today. And then at 4 o'clock, we're going to have our final speed networking sessions. We're getting a chance to meet people and kind of say hello to some people, perhaps in some of the sessions that you were with today or in sessions in the previous weeks. It's kind of like the great coffee break of the session here. And then we need to take a nap, because what we're going to do is we're going to come back for karaoke, which is the MCN karaoke tradition. And I think it's really great that we've only got a 4-hour difference with the UK right now. It's at 8 o'clock Eastern time, which means midnight or 12 a.m. the next morning in the UK. So I think that's okay. Stay up late for some karaoke there. So we've got a great set of sessions coming up today, and we look forward to having all of you with us. And at this point, we're going to take a little bit of a break. And the next thing we're going to have is you can stay right on this call, because it's going to be on this call. At 12:15, we'll have Porchia Moore and Nikhil Trivedi. So look forward to that and have a great little rest, and we'll see you back in a few minutes.
Previously known as Jigagung, the traditional homelands of the Council of Three Fires, the Ojibwe, the Potawatomi, and the Odawa nations. I'm a cinnamon-colored man with a salt and pepper beard, and I'm sitting in my office on campus here at the Art Institute of Chicago at the moment. Porchia, I'm very pleased to welcome you today. Do you want to quickly share your pronouns, and if you'd like, in a land acknowledgement and a visual description, and then we'll get going.
Sure. Thank you so much, Nikhil. So again, my name is Dr. Porchia Moore. I'm presently sitting in my living room in the land that was formerly stewarded by the Alachua, Timucuan, and Seminole peoples. I am a dark-skinned Black woman with Afrocentric features, and very short cropped salt and pepper hair. Thank you.
Great. So, oh my God, I am so excited to see you, Portia, and I'm so glad to spend this time with you today to share your thinking here with the MCN community at the Keynote conference today. So you've been part of the MCN community at least since 2014,
Yeah,
I think, right?
I was thinking about that as the music was playing over the break, and how I think my very first MCN, I think if I'm not mistaken, you and I and a group of people did go to karaoke, or we did one, traditional MCN thing. So yeah, since 2014.
Yeah, and I remember that was the year that you presented your PhD research on visitation trends of people of color to museums, where you found that on average, white folks visited museums about once a year, and the people of color you talked to on average visited museums about every 5 years, right?
Yeah.
And in the talk back, the Q&A of that session, I remember having wonderings. The conversation went into wonderings about like the ways that museums have benefited from things like colonialism and genocide and slavery and war as, maybe possible correlations to these visitation patterns that you were discovering. And that eventually led me and you to connect and to start the Visit of Color project.
Yes, literally from the lobby. Minneapolis.
That's right.
I have a long and amazing, beautiful history and relationship with MCN. So
yeah.
Thank you all again for the invitation.
Yeah, and thank you for joining us today. So fast forward to today, 7 years later, you're now the program head of museum studies and an assistant professor at the University of Florida College for Arts. And, so many of us in MCN value the complicated and often underappreciated work of educators. So first off, just thank you for the work you do out in the world and the work you do here in the MCN community. And I know that same educating that you've been doing here in our community for several years, you've been bringing to your work at the University of Florida. And you recently experienced some really frightening things as you developed a class in 2019, 2020 called Race and Intersectionality there. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and what happened?
Yeah, so thank you for that question, Nikhil. So what I was really interested in and what I've always been interested in is the GLAM sector. So if you know me, you know that I am what I like to call a chill fellow, which is someone who I was awarded a fellowship. It stands for Cultural Heritage Informatics Leadership Librarian. So I'm sort of officially trained as a librarian, but who specializes in museums and cultural heritage as a whole. So looking at the GLAM sector, so galleries, libraries, archives, and museums. And what I kept getting requests from students, both in my program and outside of my program, students who wanted to take my course, who wanted to actually explore the cultural heritage landscape. And so I had an opportunity to develop a course, a special topics course on race, intersectionality, and looking at everything from cemeteries and archives to libraries and museums. And one day I got an email from a journalist who'd actually taken a picture of my course flyer. I'd put out a flyer sort of advertising my course for the following spring with these really sort of, I don't want to say aggressive, but leaning towards aggressive sort of questions like, well, what is the purpose of a museum? And what does race have to do with museums? And the flyer had all of my course information, like where the course was meeting, the time and all of that. And I'd actually previously given an interview to a student who wanted to have me talk about my research in museums and technology. And the student said, be on the lookout for an email because we're thinking of developing this into a larger story. Fast forward, I very quickly realized that the email that I had received was not the email from the previous student. And so I Googled this person and found out that they were part of a national organization that actually pays graduate students who are earning degrees in journalism to do undercover, to basically to break stories on left-leaning liberal professors. And so it turned out that this person very clearly said that they were going to be conducting a story on me and my class. So I did more investigation and found out that this student had actually waged a sort of campaign against another employee at the university. That person's safety was at risk. They had to scrub their identity from the website and all of that. And so I kind of dealt with that. I had to do some similar things. It just so happened that the student ultimately graduated right before he was able to kind of fully do that story. But it was very frightening. Like, he went live one time on Twitter and was like, I'm about to, do this expose on the work that's happening at UF. But anyway, it actually strengthened my resolve and helped me to understand that the work that myself and so many others do in museums and cultural heritage in general, not only does it matter, but that we have to get more, even more clear about the why of our work, right? And so my safety was actually compromised. I had to do, it was a whole thing, but actually recognizing that I actually could be employed by a university, so working in higher education, and still be concerned about my actual safety in teaching a course on race, museums, intersectionality, and having people actually question whether or not that was a valid topic, and really not being able to understand the role that race plays in cultural heritage, again, at a place of higher learning, was very frightening. And so that was an experience, again, it really strengthened my resolve to be more sharp and more clear about the questions that I'm asking in my research, the questions that I'm putting forth in my classroom. Also thinking about the fact that I very strongly believe that as an academic, it is not my role to keep my scholarship solely within academy, that whatever I do in the classroom has to also have parallels within community. And so that was also important. And so because of that, I've committed to having additional conversations, creating all kinds of opportunity, and having my scholarship also be rooted in community. So I've had a wonderful opportunity to co-create 2 exhibitions here in Gainesville. One that focuses on the work of a local Black folk artist, a woman folk artist by the name of Aileen Harris. I have an exhibition that I was able to sort of co-create there at a local gallery. And then here on campus at the Horn Museum of Art, where I helped to co-create an exhibition on contemporary Black photographers. And so being able to then facilitate dialogue and opportunities and programming in community. So that, while that was a sort of frightening experience, it was really important for me to, again, solidify who I am as an activist scholar, because you can't call yourself an activist scholar and not willingly participate in the hard choices that it means to be an activist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that sounds like such a difficult and trying thing to have to navigate while you're just simply doing your job.
Just teaching.
Yeah, I'm so
Yeah.
sad to hear that you experienced that. And, we're in this moment right now where, the past several years, there's been a growing, if we look back to Trayvon Martin and the sort of like spark that really moved the current civil rights movement that we're experiencing in the United States here, I think we're also seeing a backlash, right? And it's playing out in some of the ways that you've experienced, and in folks being targeted directly, who are trying to advance the conversation and push people's thinking beyond the white supremacist boundaries that we've operated in. And museums, I imagine, aren't immune from being targets of that sort of backlash. Have you seen or experienced things yourself that you'd like to speak to?
Yeah, so like I said, it definitely, my early experience in moving here to Florida, in a very largely proud Republican state, definitely opened my eyes, and even surprisingly coming from being a South Carolina native, opened my eyes just to the level and degree in which so-called patriotic education is really and truly has a lot of signifiers, has a lot of cultural signifiers. So one of the things that I've personally done is to shift our program to a critical museum studies program. But then in talking with, so last summer, I remember at the height of the pandemic, one of the things that I remember expressing to colleagues and friends with a lot of fervor and passion is that I kept saying, we all have to be on the same page, because I can truly see that what is about to come is a wave of people basically saying, we need to have patriotic education. I kept seeing that and hearing that in the media. And what I have seen and heard from other colleagues is, particularly when we talk about historic sites, when we're talking about plantations, historic homes, certain history museums, people literally calling up institutions and demanding to know whether or not these institutions practice CRT. And if they practice CRT, then they were going to revoke their membership, that they were no longer going to be donors, that they were going to pull their open support of these institutions. That is frightening to me, because we know for a fact that museums are not neutral. We know that there's no such thing as a patriotic education, that a patriotic education, the way that it is currently framed, literally continues to advance white supremacist narrative. It's an oppressive narrative. And so I have seen, again, and have spoken with colleagues that are going back to this notion of safety, having their actual safety, which includes their mental health, be compromised at some of these sites, because you have people showing up to plantations or historic sites and actually being verbally aggressive with museum professionals and combative. And actually I had somebody tell me the other day that they were actually giving a tour and somebody said, did you just use CRT in this interpretation on this tour? And I'm like, what does that even mean? So anyway, I say all that to say, we have to get clear in our discipline. We have to get clear about not just our language, but our messaging. We have to be clear about really understanding what is at stake for our material culture, what is at stake for the actual museum experience. Like, who are we moving forward? The conversation today is around this notion of like big ideas and this notion of like digital civil rights. And to me, when I think about digital civil rights, if this is something that we are all agreeing that we believe in, that we want to advance, that we want to progress, then we also have to take a step back and also acknowledge that in order for us to say that we want to focus on digital civil rights, we have to also acknowledge that there's a movement that is happening. And we saw that movement globally with the murder, the horrific murders of both Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd. But the reality is we've seen these murders and horrific brutality against Brown and Black people for years. And so what it signaled to me is that, clearly, depending on where you are and who you are, we all have different sort of lived realities. But what I saw with the murder of George Floyd and the global response was that we are at a moment in time where this is a kind of what feels in some way like some different kind of movement. And we really have to harness that energy and that willingness for the transformation that we've been talking about for a number of years, and really again, the word that keeps coming to me today is just this notion of clarity, that we have to be clear in our messaging and clear in our goals, because we as in cultural heritage, particularly museums, interpretation, all of that, we are under attack. People are, for example, I don't know if you all have been following what happened about a month or so ago. I forgot where this was, but we're seeing it happen across the country. People actually saying, well, CRT is harmful. It's making white children hate themselves. So we saw school districts actually pulling from the shelves children's books on Harriet Tubman, Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, figures that we all have collectively agreed are critical civil rights figures, right? Folks who have done the work to help us increase our equity, right? Increase our humanity. And so the fact that we are allowing this patriotic education movement, if you will, or propaganda, to now actually go back and say that they're actually co-opting the very language of equity and inclusion that we have created. So you're seeing school districts, higher ed, you're seeing whole groups of people say, well, we have to have a diversity of viewpoint. So if you are allowed to teach about the Holocaust, then we also have to teach about the opposing viewpoint. Well, in my world, in the world that I hope everyone else wants to inhabit, there's no opposing viewpoint to the Holocaust. It is something that should not have occurred. And there's no sort of like multiplicity of viewpoint that we can teach there. So that was a long answer, but yeah.
But so much rich perspective that you're sharing with us today. You talked about harnessing the energy of the current movement, particularly at the at its increase over the past few years. I agree, we can draw a direct line from Emmett Till right to today. The movement never stopped.
Yeah,
It's been continuing, but in the past few years there's been this energy, right? And there was a talk at MCM this year by Gretchen Jennings and Sarah Phelan and Julene about an audit of statements that museums gave out as a response to the horrific murder of George Floyd. And I know you've got some thoughts on statements. So I wanted to bring the conversation there and ask you about this sort of sense of harnessing the energy of the current movement and what we've seen from museums in these statements.
So I have, what's the word I'm looking for? I am not anti-statement, but what I will say is that it was profoundly odd, if you will, to see the flurry of statements that came out, particularly by cultural heritage institutions. And these statements overwhelmingly lacked criticality and self-awareness, like institutional self-awareness. So how is it that you could, I'm trying to think of this expression my grandmother would say. I'm just going to use this colloquial expression from my grandmother. How is it that you could put your two lips, as my grandmother would say, how could you put your two lips together and say that Black Lives Matter in museums when you have all white boards? How could you put your two lips together and say that that you are dedicated to diversity, equity, access, and inclusion, and you have no BIPOC folks in leadership? How could you put your lips together and say that that you took the time to write a statement in this moment that felt like pressure and you're seeing everyone else do this, blah, 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 but you won't take the time to invest in actual facilitation, consultation, resources, whatever that thing is, 6 months ago, a year ago, 4 months, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, to actually invest in deep excavation of your institution for the healing of your institution, for the healing of your communities, but also so that you can increase your actual racial literacy. It does not compute. Especially what was interesting to me about the statements is that the statements also lacked awareness about the fact that you're presenting these statements and you're also not even able to have the language or ability to diagnose systems of power in your institution. So who's writing these statements? And then how does your so-called commitment to Black lives, et cetera, how does that actually play out in terms of how you're now going to, if you write the statement, some of the statements that I read, the statements automatically call for immediate action. And the first thing that I can think of in terms of that immediate action would have to be dismantling all of these different systems of power in your own institution. We didn't see that. And so overwhelmingly, these statements to me read and sounded just like PR or like, statements that were like knee jerk, if you will. So I'm not questioning the intentionality behind the statements, but what I'm saying is that they were huge red flags about the level of work that we still need to do across the field. And I will call out this institution, please forgive me if anybody from this museum is watching and I'm not saying the name correctly, but the institution that I have been following since the pandemic is an institution that I had never heard of. It's something like the
Sonora Desert Museum.
Yes, the Sonoran Desert Museum. The thing that I appreciate about that museum, and because of that, I've now been following them, I just absolutely love all of their social media, is that they essentially said, in light of everything that is happening, we just realized that not only have we not been doing things well, but that we weren't even aware at the depths of deficits that we actually had. And so what we need to do, what we're going to do now is to basically make some immediate corrective pauses and changes. And basically they said, we're going to do the work internally. We hope that you ride with us externally, but we are committed to this work. And then almost immediately, they did something that I thought was also powerful. They created some kind of like series, if you will, that centered the voices and experiences of BIPOC like scientists. And they basically said, we're going to make mistakes, but again, we hope that you ride with us, but if not, we're going to keep this train moving. And I felt like that was the most honest and authentic statement that I had seen, because it wasn't like, we've done this work and we've done it well for so long, or we're going to do this work. It was a very honest reflection, like, we messed up. We didn't have this awareness, and moving forward, this is how we're going to grow. Please bear with us. And I just appreciated that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you and I have talked about how one of the most important ways to build trust is by showing vulnerability, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like the example you're sharing with the Sonora Desert Museum, they're very publicly like figuring things out with their public,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's
Yeah.
a vulnerable thing to do.
Yeah. It was good to see that level of vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I want to lift up a tweet that you recently gave. I feel like this is a good moment to bring it up. The tweet read, "I'm ready for a revolution. Personal, field-wide, stateside, global. We are past time. Let's get it."
Mm-hmm.
Love the tweet. But I think, in the context of this conversation and what you just shared about statements and what transformation is needed, what are your big ideas for what the museum field needs in this moment?
Thank you for that question and provocation, Nikhil. My big idea in this moment, first, is that perhaps we need to slow down, which I think might be a little bit counterintuitive. But I still feel like in a lot of ways, both both individually and institutionally, some of us did not take advantage of the time that we had at the beginning of the pandemic while we were in quarantine. And I say that because I wrote that tweet because I was growing really kind of weary and agitated at the things that I was both seeing and not seeing, right? So I was feeling like I was kind of tired of hearing the same things being churned over and over and over again. We already know that museums have a lot of work to do and accomplish in terms of racial equity, literacy, whatever. We already know what inclusion is. We have talked until we are blue in the face. And what I wanted was something different. And so I say all that to say, what I did on a personal level was basically say, it has to start with me, and I want and need to change. And I did a lot of that, basically doing a lot of unlearning. And the thing that I kind of began with just in my scholarship and in my professional journey was pulling back a little bit more and thinking about what is my future scholarship going to look like? And actually, what does it need to look like? If I am going to truly be committed to activist scholarship, but also this notion of like liberation, because liberation to me is something that I think of and dream about all the time. It's something that is the core of who I am. And so what I came to understand is that my big idea for the moment that we are in, and I hope that, you know, it's a moment that is expansive. My big idea is that we must, as institutions, teach to transgress. And that language comes from the amazing feminist scholar, Bell Hooks, who teaches us that literally to educate is the practice of freedom. And if we don't do anything else in museums, we educate. And so the big idea is that we should really be thinking about the ways that we can counter this message about patriotic education and multiplicity of diversity of viewpoint, because I feel like the wave is going to keep coming. If they can pull children's books off the shelves, children's books about the civil rights figures that, you know, Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks, do you not think that they can walk into our museums and question the interpretation that, you know, that we have on the wall in terms of the labels, or question our programming, or question like, so yes, we need to have a decolonization moment. We've already had that, we're having that. That doesn't need to go anywhere. But what I'm talking about is, are we going to allow people to walk into our museums and begin to question the work that we've already been invested in and say that it is now based on CRT, or that it is now too radical or too revolutionary or whatever? We've barely made a dent in things that we're saying that we need to make. And so, again, I just think that we have to kind of we have to, again, all be in sync. We have to think about the ways in which we can share both messaging and strategy in our digital platforms, right? So thinking about strengthening, again, how we think about access in terms of the digital world, how we think about creating equity. The other thing that happened at the height of the pandemic that I was just like, I don't understand, is when all of these museums were closing and schools were scrambling to figure out, okay, we don't have content. Like, how are we going to get content to teach all the things that we need to teach? The museums are right in your community. Museum educators are right there. It would have been the most easiest thing to do to connect museum educators with classroom teachers via Zoom, via whatever, and use our collections, use all of that tour material, like whatever it is, to help strengthen teachers and facilitate student learning in this time where folks were like, I don't know what to do. So I don't know, I think I've said a lot of different things there, but my main thing is the big idea is to teach to transgress and to understand sort of what we did at this point now, I'm trying to remember a few years back when we wrote our guide to resistance, with the Visitors of Color Project.
Mm-hmm.
Thing that I really wanted us to convey is like our museums can be used as a place of beauty, a place of respite, a place of learning. But we also have to teach visitors that they have every right to ask institutions to shift and to change. And on the flip side, we have to also, again, internally be very clear again about who we are, what is our why, what are we committed to? Because if we all collectively agree that museums are not neutral, then what are we? And how are we going to facilitate that messaging in a clear manner?
I just shared the link to that guide in the chat for folks.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, Porchia, God, so much. You've contributed so much to this conversation and to the field in your work. And you've also talked about, yourself as a dark-skinned Black woman from the Deep South and the challenges that you experience just day to day working in this field. So, going from the big idea of the whole field and bringing that back to yourself, why do you work in museums? Why do you work in museums?
That's a good question. I work in museums, for so many reasons. One primary reason is because of my grandmother, right? And for all of the ancestors before her, whose names I don't even know, because they survived and they allowed me to be here in this moment. And so not only if their stories matter, then the objects associated with their stories matter. And because I love museums, because I had a mother who was a fourth grade teacher who took me to museums and historic sites on the weekends while other people were going to like football games, she instilled in me a love of like language and story and objects. And so museums to me, for lack of a better word, I hate to use it in this sort of sense, but like they are genuinely like magical places. And so because of that, I love museums so much. I want them to be the healthiest that they possibly can be. So I work in museums as like an homage to my ancestors. And if you look at my visual background, this is actually an image of a Sankofa bird. And so Sankofa is a Kan word, comes from the Kan language from the people of Ghana. And Sankofa literally means two sort of different things. It means it is not taboo to fetch what is at risk of being left behind. And that's sort of like the principle for why I do what I do. It is not taboo to fetch what is at risk of being left behind. And the shortened version of that is go back and get it. And so that's why I work in museums, because I want to go back and get all of the stories that have been intentionally excluded, but I also want to mine all of the things that I don't know. So thinking about like archives that have been suppressed, or just trying to like, in this powerful, creative way, reimagine what it is a museum professional is and can be, reimagine what it is that institutions can be, what are the ways that we can actually change our approach to museum work as a profession in the 21st century. So that's why I work in museums, because I'm working from that principle of Sankofa to get the things.
Go get the things.
Yeah.
I love that, Porchia. That's so beautiful. And thanks for bringing your grandma into the space.
Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I feel like that's a good note to close on. Is there anything that we haven't touched upon that you'd like to share with the conference today?
Just that so again, thank you so much for this invitation. I love you and I love always being in conversation with you. And thank you to Eric, who's always amazing. I think that I would ask everyone in the museum community to make sure that, one, you take care of yourself, because self-care, as Audre Lorde has taught us, is an act of preservation. It's an act of liberation. And we can't continue to do this work if we aren't caring for ourselves. But also understand that, like, to care for ourselves also means to practice community care. So that's something that I'm definitely growing into, like really truly understanding how to practice community care. I feel really fortunate to be in community with you, Nikhil, all these years, with Rose and Alethea of Inclusium, with Gretchen Jennings and Janine Bryant from Empathetic Museum, from Elizabeth Callahan and Anissa, and all the wonderful people from Mass Action and all these different movements. We've all been able to practice community care in the work and activism that we've been able to do. And so what I'm encouraging everyone to do is to make sure, particularly if you are at an institution where this work is still confusing or it's still not being invested in well in terms of finances and funding and time, that you are not alone. And so you can and should be connected to either other individuals in your area, or to any of us out here in the world trying to facilitate and make change. So that would be, I think, my sort of final thing. Nikhil, do we have time for questions or no?
Yeah, we could take questions. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to take some questions if we have a couple minutes.
Folks, feel free to put questions in the chat or in the Q&A section. Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll just take a moment while we give a little space for questions to come in, to thank you, Porchia. I love you as a dear friend as well, and I appreciate every chance we have to share space with each other. And I appreciate so much the perspective and the grounding you bring to the community and the difficult work, the challenging work that lies ahead of us in the years to come, and the broad ranging thinking you bring to every space that you're in.
Thank you so much, Nikhil.
So thank you, Porchia.
Thank you. Oh, I see a question.
Yeah, go for it.
So Kelsey, how do I take care of my mental health? One of the things that I do to take care of my mental health is I hike a lot. And back in 2013 or 14, at the local level, when I lived in South Carolina, I actually started a group called Porchia and Friends Healing Hikes. I ground myself in nature. I also practice heliotherapy whenever I can, which is like salt crystal therapy, where you go to this place and it's got all these Himalayan salt crystal, whatever, and you lay in the zero gravity chair and they spray salt mist in the air. I don't even know if it works, but it's calming.
Yeah, it sounds magical.
I love it. Yeah, those are some things that I do. I try to read. I garden a little bit. I've kind of gotten into being a plant mom, but I do things that help me. What I have learned, especially because because of my physicality, I am oftentimes placed in positions where this work actually feels more stressful. What I try to do is practice embodiment, because what had happened to me previously, and I'm happy to share this, I had experienced not one, but multiple bouts of burnout, mental, physical, everything. My body broke all the way down. And I did not understand that I did not have balance. I was oh, the work, and the work and not having the balance and the tools literally broke my body down. I had to figure out ways that I can help nurture my own nervous system by doing the things that I love.
Yeah, I've been taking advantage of my work, the work from home situation, to go on bike rides over my lunch break.
Yes.
I used to bike to commute, but it was stressful being in traffic and needing to get to a destination. But if I have half an hour, I'll just hop on my bike and meander with no destination on quiet streets, and it's a much different experience.
Perfect. I think we might have time for one more question. I see something about CRT. We kind of went up. What can you read it, Nikhil?
Yeah, do you think we can teach those? This is like the big question. Do you think we can teach those that are scared of these stories and of CRT to be more open and less hostile? Is that possible?
My gut says no, because I think that there's definitely some propaganda and programming that is happening, but also some people are committed to exclusion, and that is their form of self-preservation. I do think we have both an obligation and a moral whatever to help people understand what CRT is. And CRT, I mean, the fact, first of all, nobody in the world is teaching critical race theory to anyone that's not in graduate school.
Right.
And critical race, and most people in graduate school do not have access to CRT. Critical race theory is actually a legal studies, if you will. It's a legal framework for analyzing the ways in which race has disproportionately oppressed people of color. That's what CRT is. So the fact that it has been reduced to this other thing, it literally does not compute to me as someone who is a critical race theorist and who was exposed to the class in my doctoral program. The fact that there are people who are unfortunately being fed this onslaught of misinformation in the media, I don't personally think that the goal should be to try to like change someone's mind. That's to me a misuse of your energy. The goal should be, again, to get very clear on who you are while you do the work and how that work shows up in your institution. You're wasting time trying to convince other people about something that they are committed to.
And you're, not centering the marginalized and oppressed people by asking the question. And I think, history has taught us that we don't actually need to convert everyone in order to pass more sane policies and to establish, more just treatment of all people.
Yeah. I mean, even though ironically, even though I am someone who focuses on race, I do that for a number of reasons. I still always go back to my kind of calibration device. I always go back to what Toni Morrison told us, that race is a distraction. Like the function of race, if we allow ourselves to get caught up in it in terms of like trying to convince someone or something, I'm never going to convince anybody of my own humanity. I'm not ever going to do that. But if we allow it to kind of go to that other level, we're wasting our time because that's a distraction. What's more important to me is having all kinds of people walk into the museum and find themselves joyfully, powerfully, and lovingly to get new narratives, to have a rich educational experience. It is not my goal to spend time and energy trying to convince someone of something that they are committed to.
Mm-hmm. So, 2 or 3 sentences, what gives you hope?
What gives me hope? My children, my twins.
Your peas.
12 years old. Yeah, who are mighty and beautiful and amazing. Yeah.
All right, Porchia, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much.
Love you dearly, friend.
Love you too. And if anybody's on here who's not following me, follow me on Twitter at Porchia Muse M. Thank you all so much.
Thank you all. Bye.
All right. Bye.